Hey, good morning. I'm not sure what happened. I just did my podcast, but it doesn't seem to have posted. So I'm going to humor everybody and do it again, just in case it didn't work. So if you did watch the other one, this is just going to be a repeat of the first one. But anyways, if not, welcome to Reality Bites with Dr. Kelly. I'm Dr. Kelly. This podcast is meant to support male survivors of sexual abuse. Tiny bit of a content warning today. I am going to be talking about graphic content. I'm going to be talking about grooming. And we've all heard that word grooming before, but you may not know just how complex it is, how detailed of a process it is. So I'm going to walk you through an example of grooming. So just prepare yourself. Like I said, it is going to be a tiny bit of graphic content, and I'm sorry to kind of throw this at you and condense it into half an hour, but I really want to teach on this and I don't want to make you listen to me all day long. And again, I see that it's actually working now. It doesn't look like it worked the last time I did it. So I apologize if you think I came on late. I was actually on at 8 o'clock. It just didn't seem to work. So here we are. Let's go. Okay, first, before I get into the explanation of the grooming process, I want to tell you just a little bit about pedophiles because they don't look any different than most people in society. I mean, yes, there is the odd creepy looking guy out there or gal, but typically offenders don't look any different than you and I in society. And I have been surprised by this many times that, all these, for example, pastors that it's coming out about nowadays, like a lot of times I'm shocked. I'm like, I did not know that about you, and I'm the expert, right? So unfortunately, pedophiles, offenders don't typically look any different than you and I in society. They just do different things than you and I do. They have different motives for the reasons they, for example, get into certain careers, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So offenders don't have any telltale signs on their foreheads, but we do understand how they think and how they operate, and that's what I'm going to explain to you today. Before I get started on the grooming process, I just want to explain there's two types of child sex offenders. The first is situational or opportunistic, and as the name implies, this type of offender will offend against either gender, any age of person, anytime an opportunity presents itself. So these are the ones where you might hear of an elderly woman being abducted, that kind of thing, and offended against, or a child being snatched, that kind of thing. Oftentimes, these are situational child molesters. The second type is a preferential child molester. And these types have an age and gender of preference. So they need to create their own opportunities to offend. And this is the type that I will concentrate on because this is the ones where we can take the most action to sort of prevent abuse. Preferential child molesters will typically engage in 3 layers of grooming before they ever offend against a child. First, they have to groom themselves to look the part. So this involves going back to school, getting the education, getting the credentials that they need so that they can fit themselves into the environment of their age and gender of preference. Now, this might seem like a lot of work, but they don't mind because they are very, very motivated. They will move mountains to gain access to their intended age and gender of preference. So they will put as much effort into their career as you and I would into our career. The second layer is they have to groom their parents in the environment where they intend to access their victims. Third, they groom their intended victims. And it's not always in this particular linear order that I'm going to walk you through, but it will involve typically all of these stages. I know there are exceptions. Sometimes this grooming process can happen over a matter of minutes, hours, weeks, even years. An offender might even marry a woman who has children that are younger than their age of preference. So with the full intent of offending against those children when they reach of age, they might even have children of their own with full intent of offending against them. So again, stage 1, they groom themselves, get their credentials. They might become a social worker, psychologist, teacher, police officer, careers I'm in, right? Youth pastor, anything like that that's going to allow them to have full unfettered access to their age and gender of preference. During this stage, they're creating the persona of the trusted professional, the safe, nice guy that you can depend on. Their goal is to look like the least likely guy you would ever expect would ever harm a child. This is shocking, I know, but sex offenders will adapt into the age and demographic environment of their intended victims, of their intended targets. And then when it gets closer to offending time, if they have a conscience at all, they may need to pep talk themselves into believing they're not actually harming, but rather helping the child. Now, I know that sounds crazy, and it is, to those of us that would not never harm a child. But they will say things to themselves like, the child needs to learn about sex anyways. Why not learn from me rather than one of those violent type offenders? Or they'll convince themselves that they're in a romantic relationship, that kind of distorted thing, anything like that. The child's going to need to learn about sex anyways. They will say those kinds of things to themselves before they actually offend against the child. Using one of my participants, I'm going to walk you through this entire grooming process. So my participant's fictitious name is Aaron, and Aaron's offender groomed himself by getting a degree in education and by becoming a basketball coach who ran summer camps for teenage boys, his age and gender of preference. Now, at this point, of course, it doesn't seem like there's anything to be concerned about, but since you know why we're talking about that we're talking about grooming, we can recognize that this man was grooming himself. But in his environment, no one suspected a thing. Stage 1 is complete for him. Now we're on to stage 2. The offender goes in search of a target, looking for a vulnerable child. In this case, he was his teacher and coach. A little bit of background on Aaron. Aaron had been raised in a good Christian home to loving parents. He was a good kid, good grades in school, good athlete. He had a girlfriend, and when he was 15, he went off to basketball camp. The same camp his older had been to the year prior. Well, some of you might start to dislike me because this sounds like, can't we trust anybody? But we also have to recognize that every child has a vulnerability and that offenders will work very hard to identify them and to fit themselves into their environment some way where they can meet that need. Vulnerabilities are not just socioeconomic status. They can be other things too. Yes, of course, children growing up in harsh environments or being raised by single parents and maybe, not having a lot of parental attention, those are believed to be the most vulnerable children. Maybe a single parent home, mom's working 2 jobs. That child would be considered a very easy target. But vulnerable children also include, youth and teens, for example, that haven't yet learned that not everybody can be trusted. It can be a youth with low self-esteem, someone in need of a relationship, someone isolated by their peers, or having problems with their parent. What teenager doesn't go through at least one of these stages? Every teen and youth has at least one vulnerability, and offenders will work very hard to identify them. Now, we don't know for sure why Aaron's offender picked him. Aaron believes it was because his offender might have picked up on the fact that he was a late bloomer. His offender would have had access to them when they were in the locker room, changing and showering. Maybe he picked up on Aaron's insecurity somehow. Perhaps Aaron was turning his back or hiding from people. Either way, Aaron's offender might have picked up on that, and he probably said something to Aaron about, don't worry, I was a late bloomer too. Aaron would be able to look at his offender and say, oh good, you turned into a great man, you're a manly man, there's hope for me. So now we've got stage 2 is complete. He's won the attention and affection of the intended victim. Now on to stage 3, which is become attentive to both the child and the parent's needs. So while coaching Aaron's coach encouraged him a lot. He also befriended Aaron's parents. This is often a very crucial stage for offenders so that they can gain full access to their intended victims. Before initiating any acts of abuse, Aaron's offender established him as a trusted friend of Aaron's parents and then offered them a safe place to send Aaron for a few days in the summer. What parent doesn't want to send their kid off to summer camp? I mean, summer camp's like a rite of passage for kids, right? So, recap of stage 3. Win the target's affection, use false disclosure. He said, oh, I was a late bloomer too. He's bonded with Aaron on that. He's giving him a lot of praise, giving him empathy, giving him attention. On to stage 4. Create the opportunity to be alone with the child. So progressively, whether the offender is a youth or an adult, male or female, they are going to work towards a situation where they can get that child alone, where that child has to change their clothes, has to spend the night, or both. So once he was at camp, Aaron's coach, again, I said he singled him out. He started to label him as the MVP, the hardest working kid in camp. He showered him with affection and with praise. Of course, Aaron loved this, right? Then, at the end, he offered Aaron the privileged job of staying after camp to help him break camp down. He even called Aaron's parents and told them how impressed he was with Aaron, said Aaron was the hardest working kid in camp, gave him the explanation that's why I picked him, it wasn't planned, even though it was, and asked Aaron's parents permission to keep him. So, you know, of course, since they'd heard all this stuff, they trusted him. They said yes. They said yes to leaving their son alone out in this bush camp, 60 miles from town with no phone. So, but they did it because they trusted him. Their older son had been there the year prior, and as far as they knew, nothing bad had happened. That wasn't true, as it turned out in the end. But at that point, they still fell safe with this guy, so they said yes. So stage 4 is now complete. They've created the opportunity to be alone with a child. Now we're on to stage 5, which is increase the child's acceptance of physical contact. As his coach, Aaron's offender would have had lots of opportunity to touch him physically. During basketball, it could have been a pat on the shoulder, maybe a slap on the back, or something else seemingly innocuous of similar nature. Other examples of first contact might include, play fighting or wrestling, or teaching the boys to subdue each other. This is really common with an offender who's grooming a male child. They will teach them self-defense using their other friends. In younger children, they might tickle the younger child. And by the way, this is always done in plain view of the parent. Initially, they do this so that the child sees that their parent sees that person touching them and believes, oh, this must be acceptable. I'm supposed to accept this person touching me. Next, they might join in. If it's a game of, for example, touch football or something, the offender will join in. He might encourage the boys to remove their shirts or something like that. On to stage 6. Introduce other masculine principles and treat them as if they're older while establishing a sense of secrecy. After Aaron's offender had created the opportunity to be alone with him, he began to treat Aaron a bit differently. He started to treat him as if he was older, and this is very, very common. It's a very, very common part of the grooming process. Introduce other masculine principles. So in Aaron's situation, his offender offered to teach him how to drive, allowed him to drive the camp truck alone. And Aaron was excited about this, right? He hadn't yet learned to drive. He hadn't had an opportunity to be alone in a vehicle. Again, it might seem pretty innocuous, this 15-year-old boy driving a camp truck around, but because we know what his offender was doing, we can recognize it as part of the grooming process. Other masculine principles that they will often introduce might be things like prohibited video games, the use of coarse language, and the use of pornography, introducing pornography, right? So anything that they can do that they feel the boy might be in trouble for with their parents if they were to get caught, and then they'll say things like, you can't tell your parents that I allowed you to do that because we'll both be in trouble if you do tell your parents. So Aaron likely agreed not to tell his parents. Offenders do this purposefully. It is part of the grooming process. It is intended to establish their sense of loyalty from the victim, to establish that sense of secrecy between them and the victim. Once the offender gets the victim to agree not to tell their parents, they know that trust and loyalty and secrecy have been established. Offenders are smart and they are careful. They have a lot to lose, so they will test their would-be victims before they ever commit any crimes against them. So this is just part of the process. Later that same day, the first day after they'd worked a really, really hard day at work, Aaron's offender worked him hard. He made him break down all the tents at camp and haul wood, or I don't know what he made him do, but a lot of physical labor. And then at the end of the day, he started to tease Aaron, he roughhoused with him, and he offered him his first beer. Again, establishing that idea that Aaron's older than he is and whatnot. It's all done with this whole idea of testing the would-be victim. Again, telling him, don't tell your dad, don't tell your mom. They're smart. They reason, look, it's better for me to be found out for allowing the child to drive or for offering them alcohol or tobacco or swearing in front of them of course, them for engaging in sexual acts. So they test their would-be victims first. They introduce other masculine principles, see whether that child complies, gets them involved with things that they're not allowed to do, and then we know that loyalty is established. Then on to stage 7, which is where the sexual process begins. Offenders often begin the sexual process by first inquiring about their intended victim's present knowledge of sex or by introducing them to pornography. Parents, please, this is why we need to teach children about sexual matters, including masturbation. Whether or not you want them to do that, they need to know that nobody needs to teach them how to do this. Because you don't want your kids learning about this the way Aaron learned about it. Right? So we need to teach kids about sexual matters first. They need true information first so that they can compare that information to lies if an offender ever tries to do what Aaron's offender did to them. So while they were having beers, Aaron's offender did ask him what he knew about sex, asked him about his girlfriend, asked him about how far they'd gone, started teasing him about masturbation. That's when he introduced pornography to Aaron. He's teasing him about masturbation, and then he gives him a stack of pornographic magazines. He did this under the guise, he said to Aaron, you probably didn't bring your own, so you can have some of mine because you likely didn't know you were going to be here an extra 3 days. You can borrow some of mine. Of course you wouldn't have brought yours. You've been so busy for the last 3 days. Take these magazines, go to your cabin, do what you know to do. And at that point, Aaron had never masturbated. He didn't, he wasn't really familiar with the concept, but he was smart enough to figure it out, right? So he did. He complied. He went to his cabin, started looking at these magazines, figured out how to masturbate, and Aaron's offender knew that he had complied because he had drilled peepholes in his cabin. So because of this, he knew exactly when Aaron had complied. Offenders who aren't always this overt will sometimes just leave pornographic magazines or laying around so that their intended victims will find them. They will look at them. They do this to pique the interest of the victim and to lower their inhibitions. The next day, they worked another hard day, had another beer or two. Then at night, he gave him even more pornographic magazines and again encouraged him to masturbate. These ones were a little bit more graphic than the other ones, but he again ensured that Aaron was complying. Then on the third day, he just simply burst into Aaron's room while he was engaged in the act. Now this is stage 8. The sexual act begins. Aaron's coach simply walked in, plop, Aaron was naked on the bed. Aaron's coach sat down right beside him and just as if it was completely normal. Aaron was shocked, he was embarrassed, he was mortified, he tried to get up, but his coach just pushed him back down, told him not to be a wimp, treated him as if it was completely acceptable that he walked in on him when this was going on, told him there was nothing to be ashamed of, and he plopped down another stack of magazines. These ones contained images of man with man. Aaron tried to protest. He said, "What is this? Are you trying to make me gay?" Aaron's offender got all mad at him, said, "Don't use that word." He said, "This is what men do when they're alone." He reassured him it didn't mean he was gay, told him not to be such a wimp. He said things like, "This is what it means to be a man. This is what all guys do." Aaron was confused, he felt trapped, he felt alone, and he was really confused, especially when his coach began to fondle him. Then his body responded, and that confused him even further. People, of course, in consensual sexual encounters, arousal and orgasm, they're desired and welcomed outcomes, but during abuse, they aren't. They are quite the opposite. They are shame-provoking. Being aroused during an assault, though, does not mean that you're a willing participant. It doesn't mean you're enjoying it. Both the male and female genitalia are designed by God to respond to touch, and they do. Aaron was terrified by what his coach was doing, but because his body responded, he rationalized, well, maybe I did consent. He remembered, oh my gosh, I like this guy. This must be consensual. It was very confusing for him. Even though he knew it had been non-consensual in the beginning, he rationalized in his head, well, maybe I changed my mind. Maybe I did enjoy it. People, this is a very, very common reason why boys and men do not disclose their abuse. This is part of why they stay silent. Them falsely believing that they were not forced, but rather seduced into this relationship. And this is not the case. But Aaron didn't know what a lot of boys and men don't know is that their bodies can deceive them during times like abuse. Aaron's body responded the way God designed it to respond. But now we're on to stage 9, the final stage, which is leave them confused. Although Aaron had not been attracted to his coach, like I said, his body responded and he didn't understand why. He did recall that he liked his coach. He recalled that he had appreciated all the affection, all the attention, all the praise, and he just thought, maybe I am gay, you know? His parents had not taught him about masturbation. He had no idea that boys and men could be abused too. He had nothing to compare it to, right? So again, one of the many reasons boys and men stay silent is the profound level of confusion that they feel associated to their own arousal. Stage 9, leave them confused. During this stage, the offender will also be pointing to their arousal, saying things like, look, see, you're enjoying this. Look, this means you like me. Look, this means you're having a good time. It's different for girls and women because they can easily hide their arousal if it happens, but boys can't do this. And offenders will use it against them as evidence. People, again, this is a very, very purposeful part of the grooming process. Offenders will always or often establish a very loving relationship, a bond, a masculine bond with their victims before they ever offend against them, with the full intent of leaving them confused and believing that they were willing participants. You know, at the end of the abuse, Aaron's offender simply drove him home, shook his dad's hand, said, we had a wonderful time. Again, congratulated Aaron for all the hard work he did, might even have paid him, and Aaron was left confused. People, confused boys stay silent. So, hope this was helpful. It's a very, very important process for people to recognize so that we can break this cycle. And I know this was a bit heavy. If you enjoyed what I was teaching, or if you benefited from it, please know my next book coming out in June or July is called Speaking the Truth in Love, A Mother's Guide to Keeping Her Son Safe. This was a shortened version of the grooming process. I give a lot more examples. I elaborate more in that book. I also talk about all the other areas that are associated to this, how offenders are getting away with this, enablers, that kind of stuff. I really encourage you to pick up a copy of that book. Pick up 3 copies, give 2 away to other young moms who have boys. Help me to stop this cycle of silence. Help me to prevent abuse. All right, so again, it was a heavy topic. If you do feel impacted by this, if you're triggered, please, please, please practice self-care. And God bless. See you next week.